Bye for now.
The Article 50 process is now underway, and in accordance with the wishes of the British people, the United Kingdom is leaving the European Union.
You can follow every moment in depth with BBC News. Get the full story at bbc.co.uk/Brexit and keep up with events by watching the BBC News channel in the app wherever you are. Follow the story of the Brexit negotiations everywhere with BBC News.
When the stillness and calm is broken and winds howl from dunes with pitiless force, it's no longer a battle between just golfers, more who can tame the course. The Open Championship from Royal Birkdale, live tomorrow across the BBC Sport website and 5 Live, with highlights from 8 on BBC Two.
Today at 5, raising the state pension age to 68. 6 million more people will have to work up to a year longer before they can retire. The change comes into force in 2037, that's 7 years earlier than planned. The government says it'll save billions of pounds.
The state pension is going to become more expensive for the country, whatever happens, but if we don't face up to it, then it just becomes unsustainable.
Well, we'll have all the latest political reaction, and we'll be talking to the man who recommended the change in just a moment. The other main stories on BBC News at 5. The salaries of the BBC's top earning stars are revealed. About 2/3 of those earning more than £150,000 are men.
This is an area where I want to get to the point by 2020 where, when you look at us on television and on radio, we are equal between men and women, and on that we've got some way to go.
A clean-up operation is underway in the West Cornish village of Coverack following flash floods there. And the story of the boy with a double-hand transplant who can now cook and play baseball.
If any kid is watching this and you're going through a rough time, never give up on what you're doing.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to BBC News. The government's announced that people in their early 40s will now have to work a year longer as a result of a change to the state pension age. The Work and Pensions Secretary, David Gauke, said the plan would help to meet the needs of an ageing population. Well, the planned rise in pension age from 67 to 68 will affect about 6 million people, and it'll be phased in by 2037. Which is 7 years earlier than planned. Those born between 1970 and 1978 will be affected in a move which the government says will save the taxpayer over £70 billion. Mr Gauke said the burden should not fall on the younger generation.
Well, the reality is that life expectancy is improving, which is something to be celebrated, but that does have an impact upon the cost of the state pension. And it is right that the state pension age reflects life expectancy. Basically, for every 8 years that passes, life expectancy in this country goes up on average by 1 year. So we need to reflect that. Over recent years, we've brought forward the point at which the state pension age rises to 66 and to 67, but we haven't changed since 2007 the increase to 68. Now, given the most recent data that we have on this, we've had independent reviews by the Government Actuary Department and by John Cridland, and John Cridland has recommended that we bring this forward to starting in 2037, and we've accepted that. because we believe that we have got to have a state pension regime that is fair both to those receiving the state pension but also to future generations of taxpayers who will have to pay for it.
So that was David Gauke. Let's talk to our economics correspondent Andy Verity, who's here with me. Andy, obviously millions of people affected by this change potentially. Just explain to us the thinking behind it.
Well, it's all about tackling an underlying problem, Ben, which is just that we're living longer. So if you have a pot of pension money to spend on pensions for the time that you're retired, that pot is spread more and more thinly now. Either you have lower pension incomes per year or you have a much bigger pot. And what the government's saying is it's unfair to ask future generations, our children, our grandchildren, those not even born yet, to pay a higher burden of taxes to finance our retirements, which seem to be getting longer and longer as we live longer. Instead, the government believes it's fairer to raise a state pension age, so they're drawing the pension for a shorter time, and that will be less of a burden on future generations. But the generation affected by this, those born between April 1970 and April 1978, may well complain that actually they're already bearing the burden, for example, of austerity. So they're helping to fix the public finances through cuts to working age benefits, whereas pensioners, who are better off income-wise than they've ever been, are not really bearing much of the burden of austerity. This seems like another cut loaded on the middle-aged. All right, Andy, thank you very much indeed. Well, we're joined now from Westminster by John Cridland, who is the author of the review that recommended the change to the pension age in the first place. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Opponents of this are saying that the government's picking the pockets of millions of people in their 40s.
Those people are going to have, on average, the blessing of living longer. It's a blessing, but it has the consequence that we have to have a fair deal between the young people of today, who will be the middle-aged workers paying their taxes in 20 and 30 years' time, and the 40-somethings today who will be living ever longer in retirement, up to a third of their adult life in retirement. And this is a 20-year notice of a 1-year change, but it saves the Exchequer £70 billion. The alternative was higher taxes. We have to fund an ageing society.
Well, you say an ageing society, but that's actually been questioned just this week, hasn't it? I mean, we heard the former government advisor, Sir Michael Marmot, saying that the trend towards longer lives was grinding to a halt.
A 65-year-old man at the end of the Second World War getting his pension was going to live on average another 12 years. Today, that same individual will live another 21 years. There's already a massive increase in longevity, which is baked into the system, and the effects of which will last for 30 or 40 years. So
but
even if
some experts are saying, yes, you're using figures going back to the Second World War, but some people are saying that increase in the ageing population is coming to an end.
But 6,000 people have had a letter from the Queen this year celebrating their 100th birthday. In 1917, only 24 people celebrated their 100th birthday. The costs are already increasing. Even if that begins to stop increasing at the same level, it will take 30 or 40 years for those effects to go all the way through the system. The government said it will do another review as soon as it has the extra evidence, but I recommended the changes that the government has accepted because I felt they were necessary to be fair between the generation of workers who are paying for the current generation of pensioners and the same in the future.
You've probably heard what the Labour Party have said about this. It's basically a continuation of austerity. That means 30-odd million people will work longer than they should.
Well, living a longer life, the chance to do more things, to spend more time with the grandchildren, to take another job, to volunteer, to do more education, these are blessings, but they do have consequences. We can't blindly move into the future without ensuring that we have an affordable pension system and one which is fair between the generation of taxpayers and the generation of pensioners. These are unavoidable changes. It would be irresponsible not to take action.
John Cridland, thank you very much indeed for being with us, the author of the review that recommended that pension change. And just to say that coming up in a few minutes, we're going to be speaking to the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, Debbie Abraham. So do stay with us for that. Now, the BBC has disclosed the salaries of its top stars after being compelled to do so by the government. Chris Evans is the highest paid on the list with a salary of more than £2 million. Gary Lineker earns over £1.75 million. And Graham Norton over £850,000, though that figure does not actually include his TV chat show. Well, the disclosures today have divided opinion, with some saying it's unfair on the corporation, others questioning the BBC's use of public money. And there's also criticism that only a third of the names on the list are women. Well, the BBC's Director General defended the salaries, saying the corporation has to work in a very competitive market. Our media correspondent David Sillito reports.
The pay deals of the BBC's top stars are no longer a secret.
Thank you very much.
Graham Norton received more than £850,000.
The final day of the Premier League.
Gary Lineker's deal takes him over £1.75 million.
How do you feel about BBC talent salaries being published?
At top of the BBC pay list, Chris Evans, £2.2 million.
We are the ultimate public company, I think, and therefore I think that it's probably on balance right and proper that people know what we get paid, I think.
Where is everyone?
The best paid BBC actor is Derek Thompson, Charlie from Casualty, with more than £350,000. Other actors paid by independent companies don't appear. Also, some stars such as Graham Norton also have deals not on the list with independent firms. But it does give a snapshot of the level of top pay. More than £700,000 for Jeremy Vine. Stephen Nolan of BBC Northern Ireland is on more than £400,000. However, the BBC says it has been cutting top pay, dropping more than 10% over the last 12 months.
We are constantly working at ensuring that we get the balance right between our public, who want to have great shows presented by stars and great presenters, and them also wanting to know that their money, and it's their money, public money, is being spent properly, and that's always a balance. And over the last 2 or 3 years, yes, some key presenters and others have taken pay cuts.
And it's not just the size of the pay deals that's raising questions. There's also the issue of balance. The BBC has set itself targets for gender equality, and yet when you look at the list, 2/3 of the names are men.
Tess Daly earns more than £350,000. But it's Claudia Winkleman who's the highest paid woman for Strictly and her other programmes, more than £450,000. But many questions will be asked about what appears to be gaps in pay deals between male and female presenters.
There is discrimination and unfairness against women. But I think that although everybody will think it's very unfair and outrageous, this is a moment now when it can be sorted out.
One argument against not revealing the pay details is that some presenters may now think they have a good case for asking for a rise. But the former Culture Secretary who enforced this new openness has no doubts about the process.
If you consider that £150,000 represents the licence fee of 1,000 households, then I think the public are entitled to know that that's how their money is being spent.
So, 96 pay deals above £150,000. This talent bill has been dropping, but viewers and listeners now have a much clearer picture of just who earns what. David Sillito, BBC News.
Well, one of the presenters named in today's list is Radio 2's Jeremy Vine, who received upwards of £700,000 last year. And discussing the story today on his programme this lunchtime, he was questioned by a caller from Wales.
Harry Jones in Neath in Glamorgan, good afternoon.
Hello, Jeremy.
Hello, you can say whatever you want.
Yeah, let me first say I enjoy your programme and I enjoy you personally. But I'd like to ask you a direct question. Are you embarrassed to pick up your paycheck?
Do you know, I just feel very lucky every day, is the answer to that.
I do think you're overpaid.
I don't even really want to answer that because I feel like it's not the moment for
Jeremy,
me.
You spend your lifetime asking people questions.
Yeah.
Now I'm asking you a direct question.
I think.
Do you think you, the rest of the BBC, the staff, Claudia Winkleman, Chris Evans, all them, do you think they're grossly overpaid?
Some are.
Because I work with men in the coal industry. I was a coal miner. I work on construction. I've seen men buckle up through working all their life, doing hard graft, and nothing to show for it. How can you people justify the amount of money you're earning
Well, Jeremy Vine there with that caller from Wales. Let's talk to our correspondent Nick Hyam, who's outside BBC's broadcasting house here in central London. So, Nick, we got a lot of details here, but not all the details. Graham Norton, for example, we didn't get the money he earns for his TV chat show.
Yes, these figures are not complete, and the reason for that is that anybody who works for the BBC, not directly, but through an independent production company which is commissioned by the BBC, their figures, their income is not declared as part of this. So there are quite a number of actors and other stars who are not going to be on this list, and as you say, some of the people who are on this list earn more than the list suggests, and Graham Norton's a very good example of that. According to this, he earns between £850,000 and £900,000 a year, but that doesn't include the money he gets for his BBC One chat show, which is made by an independent producer. So there is a lack of transparency, which is not the BBC's fault. This is the way the declaration of these figures was ordained by the government, but it does mean that the thing is slightly murky, and also it's sometimes quite difficult to compare presenters, one presenter with another apparently doing the same job. Then you discover, of course, that they do other jobs as well. Dan Walker, the breakfast presenter, for instance, earns between £200,000 and £250,000. His co-host Louise Minchin not even on the list, but Dan Walker says actually for breakfast they're paid the same, just that he gets extra for presenting Football Focus.
And Nick, it has exposed this gender pay gap between men and women. The top male star, Chris Evans, getting 5 times more than the top woman star.
Yeah, that's right, and 2/3 the names are men, and I haven't done the sums, but it looks pretty much as if, as individuals, the men, by and large, do get considerably more than the women for doing the same job. The BBC fessed up to this yesterday. It says it's trying to eliminate this gender pay gap by 2020. The Director General, Lord Hall, was very clear about this, but there have been a number of women today working for the BBC who have, one imagines semi-seriously, offered to take a pay rise in order to narrow the gap, and that reflects one of the things that worries the BBC about being forced to publish these figures, which is that lots of performers and their agents may suddenly say, hang on a minute, why is so-and-so being paid more for doing apparently the same job? And they will get onto the phone, or their agents will get on the phone to the BBC and start trying to negotiate their fees upward, and the BBC says this is potentially inflationary at a time when it is trying, and with some success. Andrew Marr says he earns £139,000 a year less than he did 2 years ago, when the BBC's been trying with some success to get the overall talent bill down.
All right, Nick, thank you very much indeed. Nick Hyam there reporting. This is BBC News at 5. It's 16 minutes past. Our latest headlines. The state pension age is to be raised to 68. It'll be phased in between 2037 and 39. 6 million more people will have to work up to a year longer before they can retire. The salaries of the BBC's top-earning stars have been revealed today. About 2/3 of those earning more than £150,000 are men. And a clean-up operation's underway in the village of Coverack in Cornwall after flash floods last night caused serious damage.
And in sport, the oldest of football rivals meets in just over 2 hours in the Women's Euros tonight, with England taking on Scotland in their group game in Utrecht. Chris Froome increases his lead in the Tour de France today. After the 17th stage, the defending champion is now 27 seconds ahead of the field. And we'll have all the latest news from Birkdale on the eve of the 146th Open Golf Championships. I'll be back with more on those stories just after past. See you then.
OK, let's get more now on our main news, that government announcement that people in their early 40s will now have to work a year longer as a result of change to the state pension age. Well, as promised, we can talk to Debbie Abrahams, Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. Thanks very much for being with us. This is eminently sensible, isn't it? Because, as we've heard, people are living longer.
Well, actually, only yesterday, I'm not sure if it was on your programme or not, but Professor Sir Michael Marmot released figures around the fact that life expectancy is actually flatlining. And only last week, the government's own department, the Public Health England department, announced that that healthy life expectancy was in trouble. We know that, for example, men will live in good health up to the age of 63, and for women it's 64. And yet today, even with that data, that evidence, the government is announcing an increase to 68 years.
But that was only one piece of research, you know, one collection of data, wasn't it?
No, it's not. It's exactly the same data that they are using, both the government and Michael Marmot. But what the government have done is looked at slightly older data that was that was included in the Cridland review.
What the Work and Pensions Secretary David Gauke has been saying is that increases in life expectancy mean that those affected could still expect to receive more over their lifetimes than earlier generations. And that is true, isn't it?
Again, I get back to the issue. This isn't about pitching young people against older people. We need to make different choices. We need to make sure that the economy is working for all parts of the country, which it currently is not, and we need to make sure that it's working for all groups of people, including young people and older people. We want to take a completely different approach, as they have done in other parts of the world, and we want to make sure that we are understanding and recognising the inequalities around both life expectancy and healthy life expectancy, how different types of work, particularly arduous physical work, can have an impact on how long we live in good health, but also about how people are contributing to the system for longer in some cases, and what we need to recognise around that as well.
What the figures show, according to the government, is that if we'd carried on with the pension age as it was, you know, the government spending would have risen from 5.2% of GDP to 6.5% in 2039. That's a huge rise. The country simply can't afford. And aren't the Labour Party guilty of just making lots of very generous promises, like abolishing university tuition fees, wiping out students' debts and so on, and your promises now on pension as well? But the country just can't afford all these promises.
Can I just be clear and repeat what I said a moment ago? We set up a pensions commission at the beginning of the year. We want to take a different approach based on all the evidence that there is, looking at international evidence. Nothing has been said, for example, in terms of what's happening in Germany, a very similar approach to what we are looking at. So a more flexible retirement age that recognises the nature of work, how long people are contributing to the system, and that we all live in different levels of good health. Now that has to be a better way than continually pushing up the pensions age. When I've used examples of when we have people in their mid-60s being told that they should retrain, go on apprenticeships in their mid-60s. It's an absolute nonsense, and the government, frankly, just don't know what they're doing.
Debbie Abrahams, thank you very much indeed. Debbie Abrahams there, Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. A big clean-up operation is underway in Cornwall this evening after flash floods swept through the village of Coverack on the Lizard Peninsula last night. There were 3 hours of torrential downpours, and a number of people had to be rescued from the roofs of their homes by a Coast Guard helicopter. Well, our correspondent John Kay has travelled to the village and fishing port to see the extent of the damage.
What a mess. This was the main road into the village of Coverack, until it was ripped apart. Just look at it now. And this is why. Heavy rain sent a 4-foot torrent of water thundering down the hills into the harbour yesterday afternoon, sweeping away everything in its wake. There was so much power, it forced down this metal barrier. Mary has found her elderly mother's walking frame among the piles of debris. Next to it, even her kitchen sink.
What's it like then to see it all here?
It's devastating. It really is devastating. It's, you know, it's happened. We can't put it back. We've just got to get on and carry on and do what we can, and we'll get back to normal. We're Cornish. That's what we do.
Mud and cobbles can be swept up, but major structural repairs are also needed. At this time of year, there'd normally be thousands of holiday makers driving down this road every day to get to the harbour. But it's going to be a while before anyone can drive down here.
Clearly the roads are going to take a while to get back into action properly, but we're working with other agencies to make sure that that will happen as soon as possible.
2 pensioners had to be winched to safety by the Coast Guard helicopter as their home filled with floodwater.
They couldn't get us out the Velux window at the back, so they took us out the front window, one at a time. Dishwasher was floating around in the middle of the kitchen. Washing machine was bouncing up and down like a boat. And the bookcase with all the cookery books fell over like the Titanic sinking. It was terrible.
This stretch of the Cornish coast is well used to bad weather, but it was the speed, the intensity and the localised nature of this storm that took so many people by surprise.
John Kay reporting there from Coverack in Cornwall. President Trump has dismissed as fake news reports of a secret meeting between him and the Russian President Vladimir Putin at the recent G20 summit. But the White House has admitted that the two men had met privately for a brief discussion with only a translator present. Let's go live now to Washington. Join our correspondent there, Gary O'Donoghue. Gary, Mr. Trump's described this story as sick.
Yeah, one of his favourite words, that. Something he applies to reports that he doesn't like at all. I think this one's an interesting one because that's the same day, of course, that he spent 2 hours with Vladimir Putin on that famous first meeting. It was much photographed, much reported, and actually fairly substantial readouts from the officials to journalists about what was discussed and how it was discussed and what kinds of things were said. So this was the dinner in the evening, and what seems to have happened, it's a 3.5-hour dinner, this G20 dinner. It seems to happen is that Donald Trump went over and sat next to Vladimir Putin for about an hour, we're told. That's not being disputed at this stage by the White House. So this wasn't a couple of pleasantries over the after-dinner mince. This was a substantial conversation by the look of it, and the problem is that no American, apart from Donald Trump, was present. There was only a Russian translator, and no one has any idea of what was said. And more importantly, what might have been agreed or suggested or floated or anything like that. And I think that's what's concerning people here. No one expects these dinners to go off in absolute silence, Ben. They're not Trappist monks. They don't eat without speaking to one another. But this is more than just please pass the salt.
All right, Gary, many thanks indeed. Gary O'Donoghue there, our Washington correspondent. An American boy who was the youngest in the world to have a double hand transplant is now able to write, dress himself and even play baseball. Zion Harvey had the transplant 2 years ago after his hands and feet were amputated when he contracted sepsis. Well, doctors say the key to his recovery has been Zion himself and his inspiring determination to succeed, as Sarah Smith reports.
It's the story of extraordinary surgical skill and an extraordinary little boy.
I just want to write a letter to the parents for giving me their son's hands, because they didn't have to do that if they didn't want to.
After losing his hands and feet to infection at just 2, Zion Harvey was 8 when the 10-hour pioneering transplant surgery took place. But it was then that the real work began. Months and months of tough rehabilitation.
Wow. Up. Nice.
He remains a remarkable young man, because here we've had weeks of hospitalization, a daily request for him to interact, to do therapy, to undergo testing, to interface. And again, there's never been one iota of resistance or I don't want to today or I don't feel like it.
There have been setbacks. His body has tried 8 times to reject the new hands. But a mix of immunosuppression drugs and hard work means he's making incredible progress.
Now I can get myself dressed without anybody helping me. Now I can get a snack out the refrigerator without anybody helping me.
He's become this independent person that doesn't need me around all the time. He takes his meds on his own now. Yeah, like what am I here for now? That's how I feel. Like, oh my goodness, is he not going to need me next year? Is very bittersweet.
Here we have Muhammad Ali, and up here we have Ray Lewis. And in the middle of all of them is me.
Tests have shown his brain is creating pathways for controlling and feeling his hands. There's still a long way to go, but Zion is nothing if not determined.
If any kid is watching this and you're going through a rough time, never give up on what you're doing. You'll get there eventually.
Sarah Smith, BBC News.
Really inspiring little boy. OK, let's get a look at the weather prospects now. Chris Fawkes is here, and we saw those storms in Cornwall yesterday, Chris. Are there more on the way?
Yes, Ben, there are. Yes, the weather's been pretty naughty again. This time the biggest storms are actually across North Wales. They've brought about an inch of rainfall in the space of an hour to Rhyl. And just down the road from Rhyl in Abergele, we've had this weather watcher sent in showing some flooded roads, and even the high streets actually had some flooding on it as well. Now, I'm concentrating just for a moment on these storms because they're going to be working into Merseyside and also Lancashire, and particularly around the Lytham St Anne's area. This area, I think, could get a couple of hours of really torrential rain. I think we could well see some flooding in that one spot. And then overnight we'll see the rain pushing northwards into Scotland, some wet weather sweeping its way eastwards across England, but the rain getting lighter as it does so. A humid night in the eastern parts of England, fresher conditions in the west. And then as we go to tomorrow, that fresher air will be sweeping the rain away from England, away from Scotland, with a slice of sunshine coming out. But then it turns cloudier later for Northern Ireland. Band of rain works in here, the winds pick up, and it'll start to get cool. This unsettled and cool weather we better get used to because it's going to be with us for the end of the week, the weekend, and even into next week.
Hello again, you're watching BBC News at 5. It's exactly past. Our latest headlines. The state pension age is to be raised to 68. It'll be phased in between 2037 and 39. The government says it'll save billions of pounds. The salaries of the BBC's top-earning stars have been revealed today. About two-thirds of those earning more than £150,000 are men. Radio 2 presenter Chris Evans is the highest paid on the list with a salary of more than £2 million. A big clean-up is underway in the village of Coverack in Cornwall after flash floods there last night. It comes as storms across other parts of the south of England also caused problems. And all the very latest sports news now. Leah's got that for us at the BBC Sports Centre. Hiya.
Hello, good afternoon. So just over 3 hours to go until England and Scotland make their first appearances at the Women's European Championship. They face each other. The Scottish camp say this is the most important match they have ever played. England insist they can win the whole competition.
We've put in so much preparation, as in physical work, so much work off the pitch and becoming a more together team. And I'd like to say that this is probably the most prepared we've felt going into a tournament. So I think that's why there's a lot of belief and a lot of determination around this squad.
The biggest thing is to try to enjoy it, try to embrace the experience. And that's been the message the whole journey now from when we qualified. All the preparations, it has been really about, enjoy every single second.
Also this evening, Celtic are in pole position to reach the third qualifying round of the Champions League when they take a 2-0 advantage into the second leg of their tie against Northern Ireland champions Linfield.
You can't always play forward, and we showed over the course of the last season. I think we scored, 106 goals, which was the most in the league campaign. So we show we're a really aggressive team and that's how we play. But a backward pass isn't a negative pass. It's a way to start another attack, and sometimes you need one or two of those in order to go forward again, to create the space.
What we don't want to do is turn up and be lambs to the slaughter, really. So we'll be positive when we have possession, but we'll also need to be organised and disciplined, which the players, to their great credit, were on Friday night. Celtic did not concede a goal for nearly 70 minutes against this side. The quality that Celtic have in their ranks was a huge credit to the players.
Chris Froome's lead in the Tour de France is now up to 27 seconds after today's stage 17, which was won Slovenia's Primož Roglic, German sprinter Marcel Kittel was leading the green jersey competition, but he was involved in a crash early on and had to abandon the race with a shoulder injury. It was a brilliant effort by Roglic, who started the day on 37th and is no threat to the leaders. He broke away too to win the stage by over a minute. It came down to a sprint for second between Froome and his rivals for second place. Froome now leads Colombia's Rigoberto Urán and Frenchman Romain Bayard by 27 seconds. Fabio Aru of Italy is down to fourth overall. The 146th Golf Open Championship gets underway at Royal Birkdale tomorrow morning, and one man who has flown under the radar in the build-up is former world #1 Jason Day. The Australian has dropped to number 6 in the rankings after a slump in form, perhaps understandable after his mum was diagnosed with lung cancer at the end of last year. Day admitted that golf has taken a backseat recently.
I needed to take that time off because I thought I was losing my mum and didn't think she was going to be around anymore, so I needed to make sure that I spent all the time with her that I could, because leading up to that, I think I've only seen her I would see her once every year, and it was nowhere near enough time to be able to spend with your mum. So saying that, everything seems like it's kind of coming back into balance for me, and I'm able to focus on just really getting after it and working hard.
So Jason Day goes out just after 1 o'clock tomorrow with Masters champion Sergio Garcia and the 2015 winner Zach Johnson. And some news just in. 3 matches at this year's Wimbledon, 2 in the qualifying tournament, 1 in the main draw, have brought trigger alerts for potential match fixing at the Tennis Integrity Unit. They've said that in the last few minutes. So breaking news there. We'll have more on that, I'm sure, in the next hour. But for now, that's all from us.
Liam, many thanks indeed. Well, we're going to get more now on one of our main stories this evening. And some of the BBC's highest paid presenters, actors and newsreaders have had their salaries published today. It is the first time the pay of stars earning more than £150,000 has been made public. Well, we're going to be discussing that story in more detail in just a minute. But first of all, what do licence fee payers make of it all? This is what a few of them had to say to us in Salford earlier on today.
I'm quite shocked that Chris Evans is at the top. I wasn't really aware he's that relevant anymore. Gary Lineker, it's a lot of money. I'm not sure the public really needs to know this kind of information. It's just going to wow people up.
I mean, they are on large amounts, but I've noticed that the women are on a lot less than what the men are, and I just think a lot of them do just as good a job as what the men do, so I think they should be on the same money.
I think the BBC should be allowed to be competitive and pay competitive rates, because otherwise, well, we want people to watch the BBC, and it's a national treasure, it's really important, so we should be able to pay competitive rates. But I'm a bit shocked at what Chris Evans gets paid.
Well, that's what a few of the licence fee payers had to say to us earlier. We've got a stellar cast with us here in the studio and at Westminster to debate this. We've got Liz Howell, Director of Broadcasting at City University, who's worked for the BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and Sky News, pretty well everywhere. Also here in Peter Fincham, former Controller of BBC One and until last year Director of Television for ITV before setting up his own independent production company. And also at Westminster we have the Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen, who actually was one of those leading the calls for pay at the BBC to be revealed. So maybe I'll start with you, Andrew. I mean, this day has come finally. Do you think it strengthens or weakens the BBC?
I think once the initial shock of the release has happened, and that will pass, I think it's going to strengthen the BBC. I think, like being in the civil service or being a member of Parliament, there's more than an element of public service to working for the BBC, because it is funded by the taxpayer, and therefore there has to be more transparency around pay and conditions than there would be if it was a private commercial enterprise, which it's not.
And if you took it to its logical extension, would you want the salaries of everyone in the country who is funded by the public to be published?
By name, not necessarily, but I mean, we're talking about people paid more than the Prime Minister. There's huge amounts of money. The BBC has a £3 billion budget of taxpayers' money, and that's the transparency I think that we require at the moment.
Liz Howe, what do you think? Do you think it strengthens or weakens the BBC?
I think it probably strengthens the BBC overall. Transparency is a good thing, and I think that Tony Hall dealt very well today with the issue of the gender disparity by saying that by 2020 that problem would be solved. I'm very interested to know how he's going to solve it, but I'm impressed by the fact that he said he would solve it.
And what about, when you talk about the gender disparity, I mean, so we've got Chris Evans on more than 2 million. The top-paid woman star, that's 5 times more than the top-paid female star, so there is a big gap.
Oh, it's a huge gap. In a way, it's not surprising that there's a huge gap because women are undervalued in society generally, and in some respects the BBC's position is not as bad as, say, academia, where even fewer women are in the top-paid bands, or the law. But the BBC has a different remit. The BBC's there to reflect society and to, in fact, enhance our society, and therefore it should be representing women in the proportion they are in the population.
And Peter Finch, Tony Hall says, the Director General says, actually the BBC is doing better on this than other broadcasters. You worked at ITV, for example. You know the industry really well. Do you think that's true?
On gender equality specifically, I don't know that I could say definitively on that. I think all broadcasters are more aware than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago about gender equality, about diversity. I think there's broadcasters never stop thinking about these issues. I think broadly this day was bound to come. When I was working at the BBC 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, the issue was a live one then. I think probably with hindsight, having it dragged out of them is not so good for the BBC, but actually I agree that this is basically a good day for the BBC. It's better that it's out there. It will cause some short-term shock. I've seen it said that it will lead inevitably to talent inflation. I don't agree. I don't think that's the necessary consequence at all. I think...
But don't you think other broadcasters might want to poach people who think they could poach?
But I think disclosure will lead to restraint. The BBC will, for obvious reasons, now feel quite constrained in writing big paychecks. If you're a commercial rival to the BBC and you learn such a piece of talent gets such and such amount, you're not going to double it, are you? You might offer another 5%. I think, to be honest, having spent 8 years working at ITV, one of BBC's direct rivals, the notion that all BBC talent are constantly flooded with offers from the commercial sector is probably a little bit exaggerated. But I think what's happened is that a lot of dust has gone up in the air today. The dust will settle. Fundamentally, life will go on. I think the BBC will feel more constrained in writing big paychecks. I think that gender equality will rise further to the top of the agenda, as it rightly should. And having made that commitment, Tony Hall's not going to want to turn up in 2020 and say he's failed to follow through on it. So I think kind of good things follow from this rather messy day.
And Andrew Bridgen, this issue of gender equality or inequality in pay, that's really caught the headlines, hasn't it, over the last day or so?
It was well leaked before the report was formally out.
But is this something that bothers you, that you're worried about?
I think people should be paid, regardless of gender, the right pay for the job that they do. And I think this level of transparency around highly paid individuals at the BBC will hasten that for both men and women, and I think that will be an excellent situation.
And when Lord Hall, the Director General, says he's going to achieve that gender equality by 2020, do you believe him?
I think every time this report comes out, the pressure will build on for people to be paid, whether they're men or women, the right amount of pay, the pay that their job deserves, and that's fair.
And Liz Howe, there's been talk about female presenters maybe bringing lawsuits about this. Do you think that's possible or likely?
I suppose it's a possibility. I don't think that they will. I think that often people will just say, well, that's how it is, let's improve on it. I don't think that they'll actually go to law. In the US, they're much more litigious, and they did have a lot of legal actions in the 70s, which led to much better pay for women. But it's a more litigious society anyway there. I can't see that actually happening. I think it's more likely to be quiet pressure that will be put on. There is something else, though, that I think we ought to look at, and that is how this is applied. In the past, Ofcom had a subsidiary called the BETR, the Broadcast Equality Training Regulator, and that was sort of dumped in about 2010. It wouldn't be that expensive to start again with something like that and to monitor across all broadcasters how fair the pay divide is.
You worked, as I said, at Channel 4. Some people have said if this applies to the BBC, this kind of demand for transparency, it should apply to Channel 4 as well.
I think probably Channel 4 is the one where you could make that case. It's slightly different because it has advertiser funding and the BBC doesn't. I mean, in the end, the BBC must take the rough with the smooth. It gets a big whack of public money. That's how it's funded, and therefore there has to be accountability.
And Peter Fincham, do you think other broadcasters should be equally transparent? Channel 4 maybe?
Well, I would say Channel 4 is a different model. It's a kind of quasi-commercial model. But the fundamental point about Channel 4, it's in public ownership. It doesn't have shareholders. It doesn't have a share price. It's not answerable to those shareholders. So like the BBC, it sits in a privileged position in the marketplace. So you could easily say what's good for the BBC is good for Channel 4. I think if I were Channel 4, I'd find it quite hard to say that isn't the case based simply on the fact that it has advertising income. It is a publicly owned organisation.
Andrew Bridgen, Tony Hall, something else he said was that the BBC's research shows that actually their viewers and listeners want top talent and they don't mind the BBC paying for it. Do you go along with that?
Well, it's easy to say that when you haven't released what you're actually paying. I mean, now everything is out there in the open, and it will be for the licence fee payers who ultimately fund the BBC and their talent, whether they think that's good value for money. And it's quite right that the BBC, funded by licence fee payers, should be answerable and transparent to those people who are paying for it.
So when you saw the list, did you think everybody was value for money?
Well, obviously, some people I probably watch on television on BBC more often than others, and I might favour those. That will be my own personal decision. The only real issue I had was as Alan Yentob, who's paid a salary by the BBC, then gets more money from talent, and I'm not sure how that works and will square with licence fee payers. But generally, it's my own personal opinion. Some of the salaries seemed a bit high, some of them perhaps were less than I thought they'd be.
And Peter Fincham, I mean, you know, we saw those Vox Pops people talking about Chris Evans being on more than 2 million as a Radio 2 presenter. You know, what struck you when you saw this list?
Well, I think now we get to the heart of, in a sense, the most difficult area to discuss here. And when you start using a phrase like fairness or what the job is worth, what do those concepts mean? You know, what's now revealed is the workings of a whole myriad of different negotiations with different agents about different different pieces of talent over many years, and of course there's almost no logic to it at all. This is not like, say, the civil service where you'll have a grade and the grade comes with a salary, and you know that's preordained, if you like. It is on one level a free market for talent, but you have a publicly owned, publicly funded organisation working within a free market. I think when you turn the lights on, as they have today, that's going to look a bit odd, and I bet there'll be some frantic phone calls from, disgruntled people, men and women, saying, "How come he or she gets this and I only get that?" Again, I actually think that the longer-term effect of that is fundamentally quite a beneficial one, and I think it will lead the BBC to be aware that the lights are on now, and therefore saying we just need to chase this presenter and we'll just chase as hard as we can till we get them, they'll have to think a bit harder about that.
All right, we've run out of time, but good to talk to all of you. Peter Fincham, Liz Howell and Andrew Bridgen at Westminster. Many thanks to all of you for your time. Just to say, we are going to be discussing this a little bit more in the programme with James Pennell, the BBC's Director of Radio and Education. That's coming up in just a couple of minutes. Time has just gone 5:45. You're watching BBC News at 5 and our latest headlines. The state pension age is to be raised to 68. It'll be phased in between 2037 and 39. That's much earlier than planned. As we've just been hearing, the salaries of the BBC's top earning stars have been revealed. About 2/3 of those earning more than £150,000 are men. And a clean-up is underway in the village of Coverack in Cornwall following flash floods last night, which caused major damage to roads. Update on the market numbers for you. This is how London and Frankfurt ended the day, and in the US, it's how the Dow and the Nasdaq are getting on as well. They're all up, as you can see. From January, businesses will be banned from charging fees on transactions made by debit and credit card. It follows a directive from the European Union to end the charges often imposed by airlines, food delivery companies and small businesses. Well, the Treasury says the fees cost consumers £473 million in 2010 alone. Sarah Campbell reports.
For years, consumers have been charged for using their debit or credit cards. 3% extra on Flybe, and 2% extra on Ryanair and Norwegian. Fancy a late-night takeaway? Apps such as Hungry House and Just Eat will add 50 pence for card payments. But as of January, thanks to a European directive, such charges will be banned.
It's great. These rules are going to put an end to surcharging, and not just Visa and MasterCard, but also American Express and PayPal as well. And that's further than the government had to go, so it's great news for consumers.
It does cost companies money to process payments. 5.5 pence for debit card payments according to figures from 2016 and 16 pence for credit cards. Up until now, some companies have passed significantly higher costs onto consumers, including the DVLA, which charges £2.50 per card transaction.
77% of all retail sales in the UK are made using cards, so it's the predominant way to pay, and therefore it's quite right that consumers shouldn't be charged for the privilege of paying in the way that they want to.
Surcharges will cease, but it will be open to firms to recoup the costs they incur by other means. Sarah Campbell, BBC News.
Now, let's get more on the news. Today, the BBC has been revealing the amount it pays its highest earning presenters, actors and newsreaders. Figures published today, as we've been reporting, as part of the BBC's annual report. And with us now in the studio, James Purnell, the BBC's Director of Radio and Education. Thanks very much for being with us, James. Well, we were talking to some licence fee payers who were talking about Chris Evans, for a start, earning more than £2 million. You're Director of Radio. Would you say he's worth that?
If you got all of Chris's listeners together and asked them to pay for him for a week, it'd be 1 pence, less than 1 pence per person. So it's up to people watching to judge whether they think that's value for money. Our job is to present world-class programmes, and to do that we have to pay to get top talent. You know, sometimes we pay less. We typically try and pay less than the market, but we have to get the best talent to be able to do our job.
And what has emerged has been this gender gap between men and women, and Chris Evans earning, I think, something like 5 times more than the top earning woman at the BBC. Is that right?
Look, people do very different jobs, and that's why, you know, comparing, you can go mad comparing X with Y. Chris is obviously on every single day on the most popular breakfast show, on the most popular radio station in Europe. As I said, per listener, it's less than 1 pence per week, and we know for a fact that he's had offers significantly above this in the past. So, you know, we take these decisions very seriously, but we have to get that balance right between getting the right stars and paying the right amount. To reassure people, we have reduced the amount that we're paying in talent costs.
So when you, about gender inequality then, when you said people do different jobs, you're suggesting that there isn't gender inequality?
There still is. I mean, the facts show that we've got a 10% gender pay gap. That's compared to 18% in the economy overall. The BBC has a more diverse workforce than any other broadcaster, but we do want to go further.
But we're talking about on-air talent here, aren't we?
Yes, and in terms of on-air talent, we said we want to get to 50% by 2020. Men and 50% women, we want to get rid of the gender pay gap. So
is that realistic to achieve that aim by 2020? That's going to mean a lot of changes, isn't it?
Yeah, but we've made a lot of changes in the last 3 years. You know, 60% of the people who've come on the list that we've seen today are women, 20% are from ethnic minority backgrounds. So, you know, we have been transforming the BBC. We've got further to go. We should be the best because we are publicly funded, but we're determined to be so.
And I think Tony Hall, the Director General, said on that the BBC is doing better than other broadcasters. What have you got evidence for that?
Yes, in terms of the diversity of the workforce, you know, you can go through and look at the annual reports of the other broadcasters, and we in Channel 4 neck and neck, but we're better than everybody else in the industry. So compared to ITV, for example, we have twice as many senior managers who are women, twice as many ethnic minority employees. But, you know, but they also operate in the market, so it's easier for us, and therefore we should be the best.
So if you're saying there is gender inequality, are you going to be offering pay rises to your female stars?
Look, we go through everybody's contract every 1, 2 or 3 years, and we will take all those factors into account. The most important thing is to have the right next generation coming through, and you've seen that with Laura Kunsberg, with Amol Rajan, with Kamar Ahmed. You know, you see it on the radio with Clara Amfo. You know, we need to have the investment to get the right next generation of talent to achieve that goal.
Now, Joan Bakewell, I think, was saying you're not going fast enough on this. You could go faster, couldn't you? And you could just give pay rises, you know, to female stars, to women stars in the BBC, and bring them up to the same level.
Sure, but we're also operating in a world where we're having to make £800 million of cuts. So we have to do it in a way that controls the inflation if there is going to be any. I think it's.
Well, what about doing it the other way around and cutting the pay of other presenters, male presenters?
Happening. I mean, you know, we obviously can't go back and disclose things, but you know, we have been reducing the talent bill. Part of that has been by people taking pay cuts. So, you know, I think it's important for people to see that this is a radical goal, getting to equality. I don't think anybody else in the industry is proposing to do that, but we're absolutely owning up to the fact that we've got further to go.
Are you worried? I mean, there's been talk of lawsuits by female presenters. Are you worried about the prospect of that?
I think when you look at the facts, I don't think that justifies it, but obviously that'll be up to the individuals involved. I think if we can get to that equality, we'll be doing better than anyone else in the industry. And I think it's worth saying, you know, it's not a rate for the job situation. It's not like the civil service. People bring different things to the BBC, their value to the brand, their history, their reach to audiences, and therefore people get different rewards on that basis.
The BBC didn't want to do this. It didn't want to publish this list, did it? I mean, it was dragged into it kicking and screaming. But we were just talking to Andrew Bridgen, one of the, Tory MP, long-term critic of the BBC. He said, actually, what you've done today strengthens the BBC. Do you admit now you were wrong to resist publishing this?
No, our concern about it is that it makes it easier to poach our talent, that it will be inflationary, and it makes it harder to make the best programmes. You know, we were already disclosing the number of people in the pay bands.
We were just talking to Peter Fincham. He said that's nonsense. It won't mean any sort of poaching.
But Michael Grade was saying exactly the opposite, and I can tell your viewers, it happens every week. You know, we've got people being poached by Audible, by Amazon, by Apple, by Spotify. Just in my area, people are coming after speech radio presenters. It's happening across the whole of the BBC. So the odd thing about this today is, you know, there's focus on our talent pay at a time when everybody else's talent pay is going up, and the pressure for us to keep our staff and the pressure on talent costs is going up. Despite that, we've bucked the trend and our talent costs have gone down.
So do you think Andrew Bridgen is right to say this transparency does strengthen the BBC today?
I think we could have done this transparency and got to the issue about gender without naming individuals. And I think the danger is that it will make it harder for us to get the best talent, to make the best programmes, and to reduce our costs. We will absolutely try and avoid that to have a stronger BBC, but you know, it does make it harder in that respect.
But why hasn't the licence fee payers that we interviewed, why haven't they got the right to know that Chris Evans does earn more than £2 million? And yes, they may well say that's only a penny a day and we think he's absolutely brilliant value for that, but why don't they have the right to know that?
I think it makes it harder to do our job for them, to get better programmes for them. So that's the choice for them. Would they rather have the transparency, or would they rather have a BBC that can make the best programmes and be as efficient as possible?
James Furnell, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for coming in. Now, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are in the German capital, Berlin, along with their children, Prince George and Princess Charlotte. It marks the start of the second leg of their trip to Europe, and as part of the visit, they visited the Brandenburg Gate and the Holocaust Memorial. They've also met the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Our royal correspondent Peter Hunt has this report.
Royal protocol doesn't register when you're George, aged 3, and keen to head out of Warsaw. Children often have different ideas to their parents, but few are princes and the focus of a global interest. That interest also extends to Charlotte, a princess ready for a glimpse on arrival of Berlin. Only 2, she's already navigating many firsts, including red carpets and flowers. This will become routine one day. George, on the other hand, appeared more than ready to disappear from public view. Without the children, William and Kate went on to meet Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, to extend the UK government's hand of friendship at the time of a potentially messy Brexit divorce. With the EU's unity under threat because of Britain's imminent departure, the royals as tourists visited Berlin's symbol of unity, the Brandenburg Gate. There, the couple, not the famous landmark, were the attraction.
The links, the blood ties between the royals and Germany run deep, embarrassingly deep in the past. 100 years ago this week, during the First World War, they changed their name from Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to Windsor.
Sightseeing over and a visit to a project for disadvantaged young people, and an admission of a lack of fluency when it comes to languages.
The young kids speak such fantastic English. Yeah. They've been teaching me some words.
Jenny's English is very good. How's your English? Better than our German.
The language barrier didn't deter Abdullah, a 9-year-old determined to demonstrate his affection. William and Kate in action as ambassadors for a country following a new path, but wanting to retain old relationships. Peter Hunt, BBC News, Berlin.
Lovely weather there in Berlin. Let's see what it's doing here. Chris Fawkes can tell us.
Hi Ben, I've been hearing from our BBC colleagues in Wales that there's been some flash flooding across North Wales, and no wonder why. Look at these storms piling in across the Rhyl area. We've had nearly an inch of rainfall in the space of an hour, about 36 millimetres over 2 hours, and just near Rhyl, that was the scene in Abergele, and both of Abergele and Rhyl have reported some flooding problems here, and those storms are going to continue to work northwards and eastwards. Heavy rain now piling in across parts of Lancashire, particularly around Blackpool, Lytham, St Anne's and Cumbria. Again, there's a risk of some flash flooding here due to those storms. Overnight, we've got rain moving from Northern Ireland into Scotland, some damp weather pushing eastwards across England, staying very humid and warm across eastern areas, but fresher air getting into Northern Ireland, and that's a sign of things to come. Because we start the day with cloud and rain for Scotland and England, those fresher winds will continue to push the cloud and rain away. And through the afternoon, some sunshine comes out. In the sunshine, not feeling too bad, with temperatures between 17 and 23, but turning quite windy later in the day across the west, cloud and rain coming back in to Northern Ireland later on. That's your weather.
There are many movies out at the moment that are claiming to be comedies. This beats all of them. And on the one hand, it's a political tale. On the other hand, it is magic realist fable. It is baggy and overlong. You can either just see it as a really good popcorn adventure or as something much deeper. That's what a proper cult movie looks like. My problem with it is I wanted it to be darker. The script is laughable, but not in a good way. This has proved so divisive. I was reminded of the friendship between Elliot and E.T. Every time anyone says mockumentary, immediately think, is it as good as Spinal Tap? The answer is no. Very smartly reinvented a franchise, and who thought that was possible? It does the thing that cinema is meant to do at its very best, to completely immerse you, to transport you, to take you to another world.
Words of Wisdom, the film review, Friday at 5:45 on the BBC News Channel.
Millions of people will now have to work a year longer to get their state pension as the government brings forward plans to raise the retirement age. 6 million will be affected by the change in 2037. That's anyone currently aged between 39 and 47.
We have to face up to the fact that if we live longer, we can't expect the state pension age to be static, because otherwise the cost just builds up and builds up.
I wouldn't want